All right, today we're going to dive into a really complex topic, the psychological profile of someone who ends up in a narcissist's orbit. Now, let's be clear, this isn't about blaming anyone or just listing off flaws, not at all. What we're actually going to do is build a picture, a kind of personality structure, to help us all understand what's really going on. It's all about awareness.
So that leads to the big question, right? What is it that makes a person uniquely vulnerable to a narcissist? It's a huge question, and believe me, the answer isn't simple. It often comes down to a very specific pattern of traits, and here's the kicker: even their greatest strengths that can be twisted and exploited.
Okay, let's get right into it. We're going to start by looking at the outside world. You know, the behaviors you can actually see, the way this person interacts with everyone around them.
At its core, this whole profile is defined by a deep, profound imbalance. I mean, look at this. On one side, you've got this incredible capacity for giving, endless empathy, constant support, just pure generosity. But on the other side, there's this total denial of their own needs. They find it so hard to say no, to protect their own peace with boundaries, or to just put themselves first for once. It's like their best qualities become their biggest weaknesses.
And you can see this imbalance play out in everyday life, right? There's this deep-seated fear of hurting other people's feelings, of embarrassing them. And because of that, they'll accommodate others, even when it costs them dearly. Saying no feels, well, almost impossible. They might even find themselves giving to people who have talked badly about them, almost like they're driven to please, no matter what it does to their own well-being.
So, that's what's happening on the outside. But what's going on the inside? Let's pull back the curtain and explore that troubled inner world that most people never ever get to see. Okay, so a really critical concept to understand here is something called emotional dissonance. Think of it like an emotional pendulum that swings wildly between two extremes. On one side, you have this intense calm, and on the other, a sudden outburst. But the pendulum completely skips over that stable, balanced middle ground. It's just a constant state of emotional turbulence.
And this isn't just being moody, you know? It's a fundamental pattern that makes their emotional state so unpredictable, not just for others, but for themselves too. It creates this constant, nagging sense of instability.
And to make matters even worse, there's this incredible hypersensitivity to guilt and shame. Just imagine feeling the kind of overwhelming shame a traitor might feel, but for tiny, everyday mistakes that most of us would just shrug off and forget about. That disproportionate guilt is a heavy, heavy burden to carry around all the time.
Okay, so we've talked about the external behaviors and the internal emotions. Now let's look at the cognitive layer, the way they think. Because there's often a huge blind spot in their perception that shapes their entire view of the world.
This all leads to this really fascinating but tragic cycle of deception. When they're told a lie, their first gut instinct is to believe it. Then they start to notice little inconsistencies, things that don't add up, and they get confused. They can feel that something is wrong, but they just can't wrap their head around the idea that there's actual malicious intent behind it. And this is the crucial part. They get stuck there, in that state of questioning. They don't move on to confront it or take action. They just wonder.
And this statement, wow, this really gets to the very heart of that blind spot. They believe evil is something you only read about in stories. Look, this has nothing to do with being smart or not. It's a fundamental difficulty in recognizing that real, calculated malice can exist in the people closest to them. Their whole worldview just isn't built to process that kind of cold-hearted deception. So after all of this, where does that leave us? Let's try and pull all these threads together. You know, the point of understanding this profile isn't to stick a label on someone. It's to shine a light. Because awareness is always the first step towards any kind of change.
So here it is, the full profile at a glance. You've got the total absence of personal boundaries, that tendency for gut-wrenching, disproportionate guilt, the intense emotional dissonance, swinging from one extreme to the other, a worldview that just struggles to process real malice. And what does it all lead to? A split self. They're highly moral and giving with the rest of the world, but with their toxic partner, they're angry and resentful. It's a truly complex and painful picture.
And all of this brings us to one final and I think critical question. We've laid out the patterns, the behaviors, the inner turmoil. So now that you see the pattern, what is the one thing you can no longer ignore? This isn't just information, it's a mirror, and what you see in it could be the very start of a really profound shift.